My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 34 years old the Christmas. My older sister decided to make me the evening's biggest joke. The dining room of my parents' large house in Denver glowed beneath strings of warm lights, crystal ornaments reflected in every window. And the table was crowded with relatives who had traveled from different states for what my mother proudly called our perfect family Christmas. I had learned years earlier that our family specialized in looking perfect rather than being honest. So I smiled politely, accepted another serving of roasted vegetables, and quietly counted the minutes until dinner would end. My older sister, Rebecca, loved an audience more than anyone I had ever met. She waited until everyone had settled with their drinks before, lifting her champagne flute and clearing her throat dramatically. Can we all appreciate Evelyn? She announced loudly, enough for every conversation to stop. For proving that career success doesn't necessarily help your love life, 34 years old, still single, still attending family holidays, alone. Laughter rolled around the table almost instantly. Some cousins laughed because everyone else did. My uncle nearly choked on his drink, and even my mother smiled before gently waving. Her hand as if humiliating me had become another harmless family tradition. Rebecca is only teasing, she said. You know how she is? My father avoided my eyes completely, pretending to study the turkey as though carving it required his full attention. None of them noticed how many years of identical moments had quietly collected inside me. Every birthday had included jokes about becoming an old maid. Every family reunion featured comments about my work consuming my life. Every achievement somehow became another opportunity to remind me that I lacked the one thing they believed mattered most: a husband. They never asked whether I was happy. They only measured whether my life looked impressive enough to satisfy other people. I slowly placed my wine glass on the table, looked directly at Rebecca, and smiled so calmly that the room gradually fell silent again. Actually, I said, I've been married for almost 2 years. The silence that followed was louder than all the laughter combined. Rebecca's confident smile disappeared first. My mother froze halfway through, raising her own glass. My father finally looked at me, confusion spreading across his face as though someone had suddenly rewritten the history of our family without informing him. One of my cousins nervously laughed, assuming I must be joking, but nobody joined him. Rebecca frowned and folded her arms. Very funny, she muttered. Who's the lucky imaginary husband? I reached into my purse, removed my phone, and placed it carefully in the middle of the table. The screen displayed a photograph taken inside a quiet mountain chapel. Beside me stood a tall man wearing a navy blue suit, smiling exactly the way he always smiled whenever he looked at me. My simple ivory dress caught the afternoon sunlight pouring through stained glass windows behind us. There were only 12 guests at our wedding, none of whom shared my last name. His name is Daniel Lawson, I answered. We've been married for 21 months. Nobody touched the phone. My mother leaned forward first, staring at the picture with widening eyes before whispering, Why didn't you tell us? Before I could answer, Rebecca suddenly reached for the thick presentation folder resting beside my mother's plate. The glossy cover displayed the title of the largest redevelopment proposal, Our Family's Struggling. Construction company had spent months preparing for a private investment group. I gently placed my hand on top of the folder before she could pick it up. Because, I continued calmly, you've already spent the last 7 months trying to convince my husband to finance your company's biggest project. This time, nobody even breathed. Daniel Lawson was not only my husband, but also the founder and chief executive of Lawson Urban Development, one of the country's most respected firms specializing in restoring historic buildings. My family's company, Carter Restoration Group, had quietly been pursuing his investment for months without realizing the man they desperately wanted to impress shared breakfast with me every morning. Rebecca's face turned pale. My father's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. My mother looked back and forth between me and the proposal as though trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces no longer fit together. Daniel Lawson? My father finally whispered. The Lawson Urban Development? I nodded once. The same one. My mother suddenly forced a nervous smile. Well, that's certainly wonderful news. Why would you hide something so important from your own family? I almost laughed at the question. They called it hiding. I called it protecting the happiest part of my life from people who had spent years treating every personal detail as entertainment, or leverage. Rebecca had once shared the details of my breakup during Thanksgiving dinner because she thought the story was funny. My mother had invited a man I was dating to one of her charity galas without asking me first, then spent the entire evening introducing him to wealthier women she considered better connected. When I objected, she accused me of being dramatic. Every private achievement eventually became public property in our family. Every boundary, an insult, every success, another opportunity for comparison. Daniel understood all of that because he had experienced something similar after a previous business partner used details from his personal life to manipulate an important contract negotiation. We had met almost 3 years earlier while working on the restoration of a century-old opera house in Seattle. I specialized in architectural acoustics, solving the invisible problems inside historic buildings, so performances sounded as beautiful as the architecture looked. Daniel respected expertise more than titles. Our relationship began through disagreements over engineering plans, continued through mutual respect, and slowly became the safest place either of us had ever known. We married quietly 18 months later inside a small chapel overlooking the mountains with only close friends attending. I wore my wedding ring on a silver chain beneath my blouse during construction site inspections because wearing jewelry around heavy equipment wasn't always safe. Eventually, the necklace became such a habit that nobody in my family even noticed it. I had planned to tell them many times, but every opportunity disappeared beneath another sarcastic comment about my personal life, another request for unpaid consulting work, or another reminder that Rebecca's achievements deserved more celebration than mine. By that Christmas, silence no longer felt like secrecy. It felt like self-respect. Unfortunately, my marriage wasn't the only secret waiting at that dinner table. The proposal beneath my hand contained engineering reports, financial assessments, and technical documents that looked painfully familiar because large portions of them had been copied directly from confidential research I had completed 2 years earlier for an independent preservation foundation. Even worse, several pages listed me as Carter Restoration, Group's senior technical consultant, and included a digital signature that looked almost identical to mine. I had never accepted that position, never signed those papers, and never authorized anyone to use my name. My husband had already discovered the inconsistencies during his company's due diligence review. I had come to Christmas prepared to confront my family privately after dinner, but Rebecca's cruel joke changed everything. The truth had arrived much earlier than anyone expected, and before that night ended, every lie my family had built around my name was about to collapse in front of everyone they had invited to witness it. My announcement left the dining room so silent that I could hear the ice cubes settling inside untouched glasses. Everyone who had laughed only moments earlier suddenly seemed fascinated by the tablecloth, unwilling to meet my eyes. Rebecca was the first to recover, although the confidence she usually wore so effortlessly had disappeared. "You're exaggerating," she said with a forced smile. "Even if you are married, Daniel couldn't possibly know anything about our proposal." I slowly opened the presentation folder and turned it toward the center of the table. "He knows every page," I replied. "His company's compliance department reviewed this submission 2 weeks ago." My father's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Compliance?" he repeated quietly. "Why would compliance be involved?" Instead of answering immediately, I flipped to a section labeled Technical Performance Assessment. Every diagram, every sound analysis, every material recommendation belonged to research I had completed nearly 2 years earlier for a nonprofit organization planning to renovate an abandoned railway station into a performing arts center. The project had been canceled when funding disappeared, but my work remained protected under a legally binding consultancy agreement. At the bottom of the original report, every page carried my copyright notice. Inside my family's proposal, that notice had been removed. Even worse, my name appeared beneath the title Chief Technical Advisor, followed by a statement claiming I had agreed to oversee the entire redevelopment. A digital signature that closely resembled my own sat beneath the declaration. "I never signed this," I said calmly. "I never accepted this position, and I never gave anyone permission to use my reports." My father grabbed the folder and stared at the signature in disbelief before looking toward my mother. "Margaret, did you know about this?" She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes shifted toward Rebecca. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca folded her arms. You already helped us before, she snapped. You sent recommendations, answered questions, introduced us to people. We assumed you wouldn't mind. Supporting the company officially. I couldn't believe she was still trying to justify it. Helping family doesn't give you ownership of my career, I replied. Support is not permission. And permission is certainly not a forged signature. My brother-in-law, Ethan, who had invested a considerable amount of money into the company months earlier, suddenly looked nervous. Rebecca told me Evelyn had approved everything, he admitted. She said the technical partnership was already confirmed. Rebecca immediately interrupted him. It was only a working draft? I looked directly at her. A working draft isn't submitted to an investment committee. My mother finally found her voice. We can fix this quietly, she insisted, reaching toward the folder before I gently pulled it back. Families shouldn't destroy each other over paperwork. I almost smiled at how quickly the conversation had changed. Less than 10 minutes earlier, they had laughed while treating my private life like a comedy show. Now they wanted privacy because the embarrassment belonged to them. This isn't paperwork, I answered. It's fraud. My father slowly turned another page, discovering revenue projections and consultant commitments that immediately made him frown. These numbers aren't right, he whispered. Rebecca quickly tried to take the proposal from him, but he refused to let go. Dad, she began nervously. No, he interrupted for the first time in years. I want to know exactly what I'm looking at. Before anyone could answer, my phone vibrated against the table. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. He knew. I planned to confront my family that evening and had promised to check on me afterward. I answered quietly. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, I replied. They know everything now. He paused for a second before speaking again. Put me on speaker. I looked around the table, then pressed the button. My mother immediately adopted the polished voice she reserved for wealthy clients. Daniel, this is Margaret Carter. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. His reply remained calm, professional, and completely free of emotion. A proposal containing unauthorized credentials, altered documents, and a forged signature is not a misunderstanding. Rebecca leaned toward the phone. Evelyn is emotionally involved because she's my sister. Daniel answered without raising his voice. Your relationship with Evelyn has nothing to do with the legal concerns identified by our review team. Her professionalism is the reason these issues were discovered before they created larger consequences. The word wife hadn't been spoken yet, but everyone already understood where his loyalty belonged. My mother took a deep breath. Surely we can arrange a private meeting after Christmas and resolve this as a family. This stopped being a family matter the moment false. Documents were submitted during a commercial investment review, Daniel replied. Our legal department has instructed your company to preserve every version of this proposal and every communication related to it until further notice. Evelyn's name, credentials, reports, and professional identity may not appear in any document connected to your business. My father's shoulders slumped as though years of exhaustion had finally become visible. Rebecca's face turned pale, but she still refused to admit responsibility. You're going to destroy our company because of one mistake? She demanded. Daniel answered quietly, no. Companies are damaged by the decisions they make, not by the people who reveal them. He asked me to call him once I left safely, then ended the conversation. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Finally, my mother looked directly at me, her voice trembling for the first time all evening. Evelyn, you have to fix this. She didn't apologize for the joke. She didn't ask why I had hidden my marriage. She didn't even question how my work had appeared inside the proposal. Her first instinct was exactly what it had always been. Rebecca created the crisis, and I was expected to solve it. I stood up slowly, picked up my coat, and looked around the room. No, I said firmly. For once, the person responsible can face the consequences herself. Rebecca pushed back, her chair so hard it nearly fell over. You think you're innocent? She shouted. You walk in here with your secret millionaire husband, embarrass everyone, and suddenly you're the victim? I met her eyes without raising my voice. I didn't forge my signature. I didn't steal copyrighted work. And I didn't make my marriage the center of tonight's conversation. You did that the moment you decided. Humiliating me would entertain everyone. Else, no one defended her this time. Even the relatives who had laughed earlier remained completely silent. I walked toward the front door, but before leaving, I turned back toward my mother. You said she was only joking, I reminded her quietly. Maybe tomorrow you'll explain. Which part everyone was supposed to find. Funny. Then I stepped outside into the freezing December night, unaware that the folder my father was still holding contained an even darker secret. One that would prove my forged signature was only the beginning of everything my family had hidden from me. The freezing night air hit my face the moment I stepped outside, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. Daniel was waiting across the street in his SUV exactly as we had planned, refusing to park in my parents' driveway because he wanted the evening to remain my decision, not his. As soon as I settled into the passenger seat, he didn't ask whether I had won the argument or who had said what. He simply reached across the center console, took my hand, and waited. That quiet understanding was one of the reasons I had married him. After several long moments, I finally spoke. It was worse than I expected, I admitted, but I don't think it's over. Before I could explain further, my phone began vibrating repeatedly. My mother had called 5 times in less than 3 minutes. My father had called twice. Rebecca had sent nearly a dozen messages accusing me of destroying the family, business out of jealousy. I ignored every notification until a text from my father appeared. Please come back for 5 minutes. There's something you need to see before you leave. Daniel looked at me but said nothing. The decision was mine. After a moment, I nodded. I'll be right back. When I returned to the house, the atmosphere had completely changed. Most of the relatives had quietly gone home, leaving only my parents, Rebecca, Ethan, and my father's financial advisor sitting around the dining table, surrounded by open folders and scattered documents. My father looked 10 years older than he had an hour earlier. Without saying a word, he slid a thick brown envelope toward me. Read page 6, he said quietly. I opened the folder and immediately felt my stomach tighten. It contained lender correspondence, payroll warnings, overdue tax notices, and internal planning documents. Then I reached the page my father had mentioned. At the top was a draft financing strategy listing several personal guarantors who would supposedly support an emergency loan if the investment failed. My eyes stopped on the fourth name, Evelyn Carter Lawson. Beside it was a handwritten note that read, Daniel will support this once Evelyn convinces him. I looked up slowly. What is this? My mother answered before anyone else could. It was only an internal planning document. Nothing had been finalized. I couldn't believe she was still trying to minimize everything. You listed me as a financial guarantor without my permission, I said. You expected my husband to assume millions of dollars in debt without even speaking to us. Rebecca folded her arms defensively. If you had told us you were married, none of this would have been necessary. I stared at her in disbelief. You're blaming me? Because you planned to use my marriage before you even knew it existed? My father suddenly slammed his hand onto the table hard enough to make everyone jump. It was the first time I had ever seen him lose control. Enough, he shouted. Stop blaming Evelyn for decisions she never made. The room fell silent again. He looked directly at my mother. Did you know about this list? She hesitated far too long. Margaret? He repeated. She lowered her eyes. Rebecca believed Daniel would eventually invest if Evelyn encouraged him. My father slowly closed his eyes. So you knew. My mother didn't answer. That silence hurt him more than any confession could have. Rebecca stood abruptly. You're acting like I committed a crime, she snapped. I was trying to save the company. 40 employees depend on us. No, I replied quietly. 40 employees depended on honesty. You gambled with their future because you believed family connections mattered more than integrity. My father removed another sheet from the envelope. There's something else, he said. It was an email chain between Rebecca and a junior project coordinator. The employee had questioned why my copyright notices had been removed from several engineering diagrams. Rebecca's reply was painfully short. Evelyn approved it verbally. Leave the documents exactly as they are. I felt strangely calm reading it. The truth no longer needed my emotions to defend it. It was sitting there in black and white. Ethan quietly stood from his chair and looked at Rebecca. You told me. Evelyn was leading the technical side of the project. Rebecca avoided his eyes. She was supposed to. That's not what I asked. His voice remained calm, but the disappointment behind it was unmistakable. Did you lie to me? Rebecca said nothing. Ethan picked up his coat without another word and walked toward the front door. She called after him twice, but he never turned around. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. My mother immediately began crying, insisting that the family couldn't survive public scandal. "Please," she whispered, "talk to Daniel. There has to be another way." I shook my head. "Daniel isn't making this decision because he's my husband. His company is responding to evidence. Even if we'd never met, the outcome would be exactly the same." My father slowly removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table, rubbing his tired eyes. "I built this company with your grandfather," he said quietly. I thought protecting the family meant avoiding conflict. Instead, I avoided the truth. For the first time in my life, I realized he wasn't asking me to rescue anyone. He was finally admitting that his silence had helped create everything standing in front of us. My mother looked desperately from him to me. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on whether everyone starts telling the truth," I answered. "Not the version that protects reputations, the real one." I walked out of the house for the second time that evening, carrying copies of every document my father had given me. Daniel remained exactly where I had left him. As soon as I climbed into the SUV, I handed him the folder without speaking. He flipped through several pages before stopping at the financing plan containing my name. His expression hardened for the first time that night. "They intended to use you as leverage," he said quietly. I nodded. "Not just me. They expected you to rescue everything. Once they trapped us inside it." Daniel closed the folder and placed it on the dashboard. "Then we'll make sure the people who actually deserve protecting, the employees, aren't punished for someone else's deception." 3 days after Christmas, Lawson Urban Development officially withdrew from the redevelopment project. The public statement cited material misrepresentations, unauthorized use of professional credentials, and serious concerns regarding corporate governance. It never mentioned our marriage. Daniel insisted the record remain entirely professional, so no one could dismiss the decision as personal revenge. Within 48 hours, the city suspended my family's redevelopment application. Several subcontractors demanded immediate payment, and the bank refused to extend its loan deadline. My mother left 17 voicemails asking me to help. Rebecca sent only one message: "I hope you're happy." I read it once, locked my phone, and realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I simply felt free. The first week of January brought consequences my family could no longer postpone. Carter Restoration Group officially entered financial restructuring after the bank refused another extension, and several major suppliers suspended deliveries. The newspapers focused on the failed redevelopment proposal, but behind the headlines were dozens of craftsmen, engineers, carpenters, and office employees who had spent years doing honest work while trusting the wrong leadership. They were the only people I truly worried about. My mother arrived at my office, carrying a thick leather binder she called the Family Recovery Plan. According to her proposal, Daniel's company would purchase a minority share of Carter Restoration Group, refinance its debt, keep Rebecca in charge of creative operations, and appoint me to the board so I could oversee compliance. In return, I was expected to publicly describe the forged signature as an administrative misunderstanding and provide consulting services at a discounted family rate for the next 5 years. I closed the binder without reading another page. "This isn't accountability," I said quietly. "It's another attempt to protect the people who created the problem while asking someone else to carry the cost." My mother struggled to keep her composure. "40 families depend on this company. Then save the employees," I replied. "Don't protect the people who endanger them." I slid another document across the table, one prepared by an independent restructuring attorney. It proposed selling the company's assets through a transparent, court-supervised process, allowing a newly formed employee-owned cooperative to purchase the restoration division and continue operating under a new name. My father could remain as a paid technical advisor, but Rebecca would resign from management, publicly acknowledge using my work without permission, and cooperate fully with every investigation. My mother stared at the proposal before whispering, "You want to erase our family name?" "No," I answered. "Your family name stopped protecting the company a long time ago. The employees deserve a future that isn't built on someone else's mistakes." She left my office in tears, but for the first time, I didn't chase after her. Later that afternoon, Daniel found me sitting alone in the conference room, staring through the window. Part of me still wants to fix everything, I admitted. He smiled gently and took my hand. Compassion doesn't require surrendering your boundaries, he said. You can care about people without rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices. Together, we helped organize financing for the employee cooperative, but Daniel recused himself from every internal vote so no one could accuse him of using our marriage for influence. Months later, the cooperative successfully purchased the equipment, contracts, and workshop through an open bidding process. 37 of the 43 employees kept their jobs, while the remaining workers received priority wage, payments, and placement assistance. The Carter Restoration Group name quietly disappeared from the building, replaced by Summit Heritage Cooperative, a company owned by the people whose craftsmanship had always been its greatest strength. Meanwhile, the city investigation concluded exactly as the evidence suggested. Rebecca had personally instructed a junior coordinator to remove my copyright, notices, and insert my altered digital signature into the investment proposal. She was prohibited from managing municipal redevelopment projects for 3 years and required to complete professional ethics training before returning to licensed practice. It wasn't the end of her career, but it was the end of the version built on borrowed accomplishments and family protection. My father resigned from the company before the restructuring was complete. A week later, he met me for breakfast carrying 2 envelopes. The first contained a notarized declaration confirming I had never been an owner, guarantor, or authorized representative of Carter Restoration Group. The second was a handwritten letter. He apologized for every moment he had stayed silent while my mother and sister minimized my achievements, borrowed my work, and laughed at my expense. He didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or explain his behavior away. He simply admitted he had mistaken silence for peace and understood now that silence had protected the wrong people. I hugged him because the apology expected nothing in return. My mother changed more slowly. For months, she continued telling relatives that I had overreacted. But every time someone asked why I hadn't invited the family to my wedding, the answer became harder to defend. Eventually, she began saying something different. Evelyn didn't feel safe sharing that part of her life with us. Several weeks later, she quietly added another sentence. We gave her reasons. That small change mattered more than dramatic speeches because it acknowledged responsibility instead of rewriting history. Rebecca's first genuine apology arrived nearly a year after Christmas. She sent formal correction letters to the city, former clients, professional associations, and everyone who had received the proposal, admitting she had used my work without permission and accepted full responsibility for altering the documents. She never asked me to withdraw complaints or influence the investigation. Instead, she wrote one final sentence in a private letter. I kept making you look smaller because I was afraid people would notice how insecure I really was. I'm sorry for building my confidence from your silence. I thanked her through my attorney, but explained that forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. Months later, we met once in a therapist's office. She admitted she had intentionally humiliated me at Christmas because she suspected I was dating someone influential and wanted to force me into revealing the truth publicly. You could have simply asked if I was happy, I told her. She looked down and quietly replied, I didn't think you'd tell me. You're right, I answered. Because happiness isn't something people are entitled to just because we're related, she cried. But I didn't comfort or punish her. Some lessons need room to exist without interruption. A year after that unforgettable Christmas, Daniel and I hosted a small holiday dinner in the same mountain chapel where we had exchanged our vows. There were only close friends, my father, my mother, Daniel's family, and a few colleagues who had become like relatives over the years. Rebecca wasn't there because rebuilding trust takes more than apologies and calendars. During dessert, my mother noticed something different. For the first time since our wedding, I wasn't wearing my ring on the silver chain beneath my blouse. It rested openly on my left hand. She smiled quietly but said nothing. She had finally learned that not every meaningful moment required commentary. Daniel gently squeezed my hand beneath the table, and I realized how different peace felt when it wasn't built on pretending. People often ask whether revealing my marriage was my revenge. It wasn't. Revenge would have been using Daniel's influence to destroy my family. Instead, I simply refused to let my reputation, my marriage, or my career become another tool for someone else's convenience. The truth accomplished everything that anger never could. My father lost his company but found his integrity. My mother stopped measuring love by appearances and slowly learned to respect boundaries she once mocked. Rebecca lost the protection that had hidden her choices and finally began building a life based on her own work instead of someone else's. As for me, I stopped believing that peace meant keeping everyone else comfortable while I stayed silent. Real peace begins the moment you understand that love doesn't require unlimited access, forgiveness doesn't erase accountability, and family isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who protects your dignity when everyone else is laughing. Whenever I remember that Christmas dinner now, I no longer hear Rebecca asking whether it was lonely to spend the holidays alone. I remember the silence after I calmly placed my glass on the table and answered, I've been married for almost 2 years. What I was really saying was something much bigger. I had built a life filled with respect, honesty, and genuine love. They simply never cared enough to notice until it was too late. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't hurting the people who underestimated you. It's quietly creating a life they can no longer control, borrowing nothing from their approval, and allowing the truth to speak louder than every joke ever told at your expense.